So thank you, Gurudev, 'cause your children couldn't thank you enough.
Yes, first of all, it's a great honor to do the moderation on this second talk by Paul Mason. My name is Roland Hartmann. I'm living in Austria and I'm teacher of meditation since 1974. And it's a great thing to have Paul Mason again on his other topic. The last one, the first one, a month ago, was on who was Gurudev Swami Brahmananda Saraswati. It was a great lecture or a great talk. Now today, Paul Mason will give us an insight into the roots of dhyana meditation in comparison with TM. And in the invitation text, he writes, this is a follow-up talk, like as I said it, giving a comparison about the meditations, which with focus on the sadhana taught by Gurudev Swami Brahmananda Saraswati. To mention of the meditation taught as deep meditation, or transcendental meditation, or dhyana meditation, and so forth. So it seems to be that there are many names or many terms of this kind of transcending meditation. We, teachers of transcendental meditation, have been given the term, and we are all curious about what you will give us more knowledge on this topic, Paul Mason. Paul Mason, as you know, is the author of, yes, may I just introduce you shortly, is the author of the biographies of Swami Brahmananda Saraswati, of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and the Beatles, and he is a great, reliable source of knowledge about these two personalities, at least, of Gurudev Swami Brahmananda and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And we will enjoy what I was asking you to comment and to give us what is your insight, what is your knowledge about these different ways of meditation. The microphone is yours, Paul Mason.
Thank you, Roland.
May I just ask everyone to give us their sites, not just the audio, but also the video. It's so much more inviting to see you by face, not just by your names only. That would be a great thing. Thank you, Carmelo, and all other ones. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So it's a great thing. What we're doing today, we're going to have this talk first, and at the end, we're going to have a group meditation, just for you to know. So once more, Paul Mason, the microphone is yours.
Hi, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming along. It's a privilege to be able to share what I've been thinking about for actually a long, long time. I've been thinking about these things. I went for a walk before this talk, and I mean, like 1969, that's when I got started being interested. That's a long, long time ago. So I'm basically passing on what I've amassed in all that time. Now, back in those days, people didn't talk about meditation, not in the West. We reserved the word meditation. It was something to do with Christianity. It was something to do with like Easter or Christmas, where people sat around and it's a thinking thing. It's a religious focus on a particular theme. And then when I was a kid, nobody mentioned the word meditation. So it was a word that I didn't even begin to understand. I understood the idea of trying to communicate to a higher being, that's what we had instilled in us. We had the idea that there was a bigger being called God, and that we should try and connect with that power. And I remember going into a church when I was still a little kid. I went to a church school, and I went in there and I kind of asked myself, how do you talk to God? How do you communicate? And I thought, well, you've got to sit down or kneel down, and you've got to close your eyes, and you've got to be silent. And like, so that was my first perception of anything like quietening down and making an inner connection. So when I was at school, I don't know, I think I saw a poster on the Underground Railway in London saying something about meditation. And it's like, what's meditation? So I asked somebody at school, I asked a guy who appeared to be from India, I said, what is meditation? And he said, I think it is when you are sitting and you're thinking of maybe, say, cow. And I'm thinking, you're sitting and you're thinking of, say, cow. And I didn't feel very well informed. And I didn't spend a lot of time sitting thinking about cow, I'll be honest. But later in the 60s, one night, I tried to teach myself meditation. I was on my own and I was wide awake, and I sat there and I thought to myself, I'm going to meditate. And I closed my eyes, and there was all this turmoil, and there was all these thoughts going on. And I'm thinking, God, this is difficult. My mind's very busy. And I understood in somewhere in my head that to meditate meant to settle down that thinking, to not think. So that was my perception at that age, sort of 17 years old. And what had happened sometime earlier than this was that I'd gone round to a friend's house. A friend of mine was called Leo. And he said to me, he said, man, he said, I want my friends to be your friends. Okay, so we walked all the way to his bedsit in Earls Court. And he introduced me to his flatmate, who happened to be Lemmy, who later became famous as a heavy metal bass guitarist, but he didn't play bass guitarist. But he and Leo were both very strutting peacock, very invested in themselves, very full of themselves, which I mean, a lot of young people are. And I noticed that they both had a special chair. You could say it was a throne, like for not a king, but for a lord. They behaved like lords, and they both had a very high-backed throne which they would sit on, like lords, like medieval lords. And I found that very amusing. And after maybe 2 or 3 months, it occurred to me, I thought I'd quite like to have a special chair, not a throne, but a special chair for me. So I went to the furniture shop, and there was nothing special there. There was no thrones. Okay, this was a suburban used furniture place, and there was just a relaxation. I thought, oh, that'll do, because I don't have illusions about myself. I don't need to pretend to be a lord. So I got this chair, and I was a working person, and at the end of each day, I would sit down on that chair, and I would just relax. And it wasn't with any intention, but if I reflect on what I did then, I was meditating. Each time I sat down, I closed my eyes, I was settling, and the thoughts were tumbling inward. And I remember feeling extraordinarily refreshed. I remember feeling as if I was right. There was something right with the world, that when I opened my eyes, everything in the room looked fresh, and the colors resonated, and I felt good. I cannot remember one time when sitting and settling didn't work. And I just did it routinely. I didn't think, oh, I'm doing something special. And then I stopped working there. So I stopped sitting in that chair. So I stopped that process. I'm only telling you about this because we've all come to the topic of meditation in our own ways. And I've got the privilege of telling you about Maharishi's teaching of meditation, and indeed his masters. And I can't use the word meditation without telling you what it meant for me then. Now, back in time, when did meditation start? When did people start meditating? When did somebody get the idea to close their eyes and rest? Well, I would imagine it started pretty quickly in life, because it's a natural tendency for people to sit down and close their eyes and rest. There's nothing spectacular of an observation about that. But meditation, there's a bit more to it, isn't there? It isn't just sitting down and relaxing, is it? If that's what it was, then we wouldn't call it meditation. So a lot of people sit down and relax, but we who meditate would distinguish what they're doing from what we're doing. And we need to know what distinguishes just sitting down and relaxing from a system of meditation. And we need to look historically at when that became the issue. And I would say from my research that happened about 2,500 years ago. Probably happened long before then, but in the 7th century BC, there were Jains. The Jain sect had come up, and they've got a reputation for being very austere and doing tapasya, self-mortification, being hard on themselves, but they've definitely got a spiritual tradition. We then look at Buddhists who have a similar reputation of being a bit austere, and again are talking about indwelling and meditation. And it's very clear that from the stories of the Buddha that he'd done a certain amount of exercises before he attained the state that confirmed him as a Buddha, as somebody who got the light within them. Basically, the word dhyaan in India, dhyaan, is meditation. We say it's meditation, but there might be some argument. It might mean something else, and so forth. You might be interested to know that the word dhyaan, as in Sanskrit, is in Pali jhan, and in Chinese it's chan, and in Japanese it's zen, and in Tibetan it's gong. So we've got variations. All these people are meditating clearly, and they're all using pretty much the same sound to describe what they're doing. So, okay, that's not too big a deal. What is a big deal was the word yoga. Okay, now yoga, we can be the first mention of it in a document, in a historical document. It's interesting. It's in the Yoga Sutras, and it's in the Katha Upanishad. And this word yoga, which means a union with oneself, joining with oneself, meeting oneself, is the state that is being described, is what we're talking about meditating. When we meditate and we turn within, we're attaining the state of yoga. Now, I want you to spare me a few minutes to read these, because these are very, very early verses that describe the acquisition or the attainment of yoga. And these were written in the 5th century BC. So I'm not just quoting something from yesterday's newspapers. I'm quoting something that's 2,500 years old. And personally, I think people should know more about it. I think it should be more of our knowledge base as meditators. But what this verse out of the Upanishad 1:2:12 says is, he who is difficult to be seen and full of mystery, concealed deep within the heart cave, the ancient, he who, learning by yoga of his self, comprehends Atman within him as a God, he leaves behind, that is, he leaves sorrow and joy far behind. This is even more focused. When the 5 senses are settled and the mind has ceased to think, and the intellect does not stir, that is a high state, they say. Thus, yoga is considered to be holding still the senses, then one should be alert. And then there's a warning, for yoga comes and goes. So what that's saying is, you, by suspending all your senses and your thoughts, you attain the state of yoga. But he's warning you, or she's warning you, is even in that state, this yoga isn't permanent. You're going to come back to the relative. You're going to find the world as it is, but you've come back to it after being in that state of yoga. Now, many people talk about the Gita, the teachings which are focused on Lord Krishna and Arjuna, the charioteer, but very few of them seem to be as focused on its descriptions of meditation. And after reading the ones that I just have, this is very much in step with them. In a clean spot, it says, having set a firm seat, or we can say cushion, that's what it's referring to, of his own, neither high nor low, made of cloth, the deerskin and kusha grass, one upon the other, there, having made the mind one pointed, with the activities of the mind and the senses controlled, again, let him seated on that seat practice yoga for self-purification. A few verses later, he says, establishing the mind in the self, let him not think even of anything. From whatever cause the restless and unsteady mind wanders away, from that let him restrain him and bring it under the control of the self alone. For supreme happiness comes to the yogi whose mind is quite peaceful, whose passion is quieted. So what they're saying is that yoga is the state when you've settled down and you're no longer thinking about this, that, and the other. Your senses are no longer being used in this direction. This is the state of yoga. Right, now we come to Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, otherwise more properly known as the Yoga Darshanam. And in that second, well, let's read the first 4 verses, but it's the second verse that we really need to think of. Now, the teaching of yoga. Yoga is nirodha. That's the restraint, stopping, or halting of vritti, which is the whirling of thought waves and mental activity, of the chitta, which is our consciousness. Then the seer rests in his own self. Then we're warned. At other times, he is identified with the whirling of the mind. So it's an echo of the other verse, which is saying, oh, by the way, you're not going to stay there in that state. Now, they're not making any promises of you becoming cosmic hero. They're saying, by meditating, you will totally settle down. In my estimation, that's talking about resolving a fundamental disconnect. When I went into that church as a child, when I sat down to meditate, I was feeling a disconnect. I was feeling at odds with the world. And when I meditate, I don't feel at odds with the world. And I think that historically, mankind's had that problem, and that's what they've tried to resolve through meditation or yoga. Now, just out of interest, the Kashmir Shaivism, they've got, I can't pronounce it very easily, the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, and 129 is the very moment that the mind goes wandering, that inattentiveness is to be abandoned. Stillness should follow. So it's the same story, that if you're not following your thoughts all the time, if you're settling down, eventually you will find an inner state of happiness. Well, thank you for letting me read those. It's not easy reading stuff online, and perhaps you'd do better to access those verses yourself and become acquainted. So let's go to Gurudev. Basically, I'd like to make a point about Gurudev, quite apart from him being a stunning representative of the succession of teachers that have taken the station of being a Shankaracharya all the way from the first, the Adi Shankara. He was a very spiritualized man from what we can gather. And I know something about him from constant reading and translation of his stuff that I find surprising. As a Westerner, when I look at philosophy, when I look at anything to do with meditation, I'm trying to look at it objectively. And when I look at my life, when I have problems in it, I try to look at them objectively. We're instilled into us through our education to be objective, to be scientific, to restrain ourselves from making subjective perceptions or subjective conclusions. And therefore, it's really surprised me as the more I've been researching and translating Gurudev as to how subjective he was and how he was encouraging, by the looks of it, everybody else to be subjective. Now, you might say, well, that doesn't have any real meaning. We're all subjective, but it's about a balance. And I mention it in particular because as he was born in India, he was subject to hearing all those old stories, those Purana stories about the battles of the gods and the Asuras and the Devas, everything. He was being instilled about a magical world that had existed, he says, even millions of years in the past. I mean, forget about our notions of hundreds of years and thousands. He even used the word million. I think that Indian people, especially in his day, were instilled with certain images of life, which even after becoming a Mahayogi, he was still communicating to other people. He still had an investment in all those stories about child saints, about the visitations of gods and so forth. Now, I was surprised at that because I was thinking, well, Maharishi has always talked as much as possible, at least in his early ministrations, giving a very scientific analysis, giving a very scientific view about meditation, giving a very objective view about the effects and what one can hope from these things. And I see a very different characteristic in a lot of what I read with Gurudev. However, he was not just talking about gods. He was not just talking about that. He also was obviously all too much familiar with the Yoga Sutras, and he was commenting on that. If I can read something that he said that reflects his understanding of the Yoga Sutras. He said, the ultimate aim is this, that by the practice of having stopped the fluctuations of the inner self to experience Paramatma, which is the self with a capital S, calm without a ripple in any part of the pool of water, that manner a person can see his own face, that really is the method, the niruddha of the chitta, which is the stopping of the consciousness, of the fluctuations of consciousness, he goes on to say, is really giving a clear reflection of the imperishable Atma, your soul, in the instrument of the inner vision. This indeed is the darshan of Atma. What he's saying is your own Atma, your individual soul, when you settle your own connection with the Paramatma, the higher self, is so evident, and you're still without a ripple, you're at one, the Advaita, the connection that you, when you're meditating and you've let go of all your thought, but you still have your consciousness flickering away, that you are the higher self. There isn't a division. You have become that. So to me, that's fascinating. He's not only saying you can rest when you settle down to meditate, that you'll feel a bit better for doing so. He's saying you are at one with the highest aspect of creation. So I find that very reassuring. And it also concurs with my own experience when I first meditated through the Transcendental Meditation program out in India. I actually felt at total one with myself. And it was astonishing because I could say it was the first time that I'd really felt that clear that my consciousness was there, but it wasn't conscious of something. It was just conscious of being. And that description that he's just given, like you're still without a ripple in the water, is absolutely spot on. I wasn't even aware that I had a body. And I think that all these descriptions of yoga, be they in the Upanishads, or be they be in the Yoga Sutras, or be they with Gurudev or with Maharishi, it's all the same. And it's normal. It's not something that we have to spend 30 years for or 30 lifetimes. It's something very accessible. And I for one, I'm concerned that people think that they have to wait 30 years or 30 lifetimes, because I think that it's actually simpler than that. We do access that level of peace within ourselves, and we should acknowledge it. We shouldn't be kind of saying, oh, well, that's the beginning, and then it'll get a bit better and a bit better incrementally. No, that's it. We shouldn't keep putting off this idea that we'll discover the Paramatma, that we get that taste of bliss in a way that that word bliss can be misguiding, because we want it to be more special than normal happiness. So we're anxious for something. It's better to let go of anxieties entirely. Anyway, Gurudev didn't only teach according to that idea of letting go of the thoughts, because as many people would say, hey, that sounds okay, to let go of thoughts, to settle down, not to be attached to sensory objects, but I can't do it. And so what he said about this is that you need a yukti. I don't know. I don't expect anybody here much to understand what I mean by yukti. Perhaps some Indians who understand Sanskrit will be go click. Right, I get that. But let me say it like Gurudev said it. Certainly, you should obtain the key for joining the mind to Paramatma, since from many lifetimes you have repeatedly missed the way of routine practice. So you are not suddenly going to be inclined to be going in Paramatma's direction. By a special yukti, now a yukti means a skill or a knack or a device. So we can say knack, it's a knack within the mind to be able to do this. One is caused to go in his direction. The expression in the, we don't need to say that. So we're going to jump on, and it says, without the yukti, the anxiety of the mind will not become quietened. Therefore, this yukti is to be gained from a sadguru, genuine guru, and using this as a way to get darshan of the Paramatma. I'm not going to read the whole verse in the context. I don't think I am. I'm just tracing it. No, well, basically he's saying, if you want to be taught this, you need to find a sadguru. That means a proper guru, a bona fide guru. And a sadguru is one who is, I hate to use the term, but somebody who's enlightened. They're lit up. They contain the knowledge within them. They are the knowledge. He's saying, don't get it from a book. Okay, he emphasizes that you can read books, but you can't learn from them in the same way as from a sadguru. And basically, without prejudicing anybody against pundits, he doesn't say, or learn from a pundit. And he doesn't say, learn from your friend down the road. And he doesn't say, learn from this teacher or that teacher who sets themselves up as a teacher. So he's really clear that if what you're doing is you're following the Sanatana Dharma path, and you want this method, you need to find somebody who really knows their onions. Otherwise, you're going to miss out. Otherwise, you're going to to miss the proper experience of it. But he was, like I explained in my other talk, he was expressing the teachings of Shankara. And Shankara was very directed towards those people who do believe in the gods, you know, whether it's Lord Shiva, Lord Vishnu, Divine Mother, whoever it is, Ganesha. There's so many gods. Somebody said 33,000. I think we'd be here a long time if we listed all the ones that we could remember. You go into the hills, there's a shrine to this god and that god. And what do you do? Do you actually become totally connected to only wanting pictures of Lord Shiva in your home? And whenever you see a picture of Lord Vishnu, you say, "Oh no, no, no! I'm not interested. I'm not a Vishnavite. I don't like Vishnavites," or vice versa. Or I don't like Shivites. Do you behave like that, like a football hooligan, or do you actually, like Adi Shankara wanted you to see them all as a part of a manifestation of one divine energy? He was very, very smart, was Adi Shankara. He wanted everybody in it. He didn't want them fighting, this is my temple, I don't want you coming into my temple, you don't follow my beliefs or whatever. He tried 2,500 years ago, he tried to integrate everybody and everything. And Gurudev did exactly the same thing. He tried to teach everybody who had a belief in a god, a devata, to see in that the connection with all the others, and that's how he went about his business. He taught people to see their god, their favored god. He would ask them, "What is your favorite god?" I'm paraphrasing, but he's basically saying, "What is the god that you worship?" And he would explain them how they should sit in meditation, how they should chant the name of that particular god, and he would explain to them how they should visualize that god. And this is what he called meditation. And interestingly, I have the tale from a pundit of him being taught how to meditate by Gurudev. And initially, Gurudev explains him how to see the image of the god that he's referring to. And then he said, if you carry on seeing the god in that way, then this is what is called dharana. I'm pronouncing it wrongly, probably. And then if you sit for much longer in the same way, this is dhyana. Okay. And then if you sit for longer, and he said the mind starts getting absorbed in Bhagwan, that is the goal of the meditator and the meditator become one, then you fall into an absorption of that bliss. He's talking about the same thing, isn't he? He's saying, look, you can get to the state of yoga, but he's showing the person who believes in the God a method of getting to that state, the Paramatma, the Brahma, whatever you're going to call that inner bliss. And he's addressing the beliefs of that particular individual. That particular individual is a devotee of Lord Rama. That other one is a devotee of the goddess Saraswati. Each child in India is instilled with a love and an interest in particular deities. This is how he would teach somebody with those beliefs. So he would teach them the japa, which is the repetition of the name of that God, and he would teach them the dhyaan, the method of visualizing them and contemplating them, and various other practices. And this was a form of worship. But then I remind you, I say, for me, when I first started to think about making a connection with the inner being, it was a religious act. I think it's very hard to divide something like this going within from looking to a higher divinity or a higher power. I made a note of this. It's like actually when we go within ourselves, we're focusing on a higher power or entity or clarity. Okay, that's how I tried to express it when I was writing my notes. So when we sit down, we focus on that thing which is ultimately more powerful or more clear than we are. And I think that there's a similarity to all techniques of meditation that do that at that level. I'm not going to keep to a particular linear flow of these. I want to jump now to sort of saying, well, look, a lot of us have heard about Gurudev and about yoga and about meditation from Maharishi. And he got most, if not all, of what he knew on this subject from Gurudev. And so let's jump to him. Whether I've got other quotes than that around here, it doesn't really matter. The thing is that when he started his mission in 1955, he happened to be in South India. And I say he happened to be. I think it was happenstance. I don't think there was any planning whatsoever. And he was asked to speak, and he was asked to teach a method of meditation. And obviously, he'd been taught to meditate, and he knew quite a lot about meditation because he'd been a checker. He'd been one of the brahmacharis who'd go around and check that people were meditating right according to the instructions that Gurudev had given. So he set up himself as a teacher of meditation. He didn't set up as a guru. He didn't set up as a Shankaracharya. He set up as a helper, almost like the checker that he was. He was a meditation checker. But fortunately, most of the people that came to him would have already had mantras, family mantras, and personal mantras that had already been given to them. So he wouldn't have had to give them mantras, but he would have known a fair amount of them himself and made sure that people were comfortable with the ones that he set them up with. And he described this setting up of their practice as their sadhana. He didn't refer to it as meditation in those days. He only used the word meditate once in 4 days of lectures back in those days. He used the word sadhana. He also used the word transcend. So he understood at that point the mechanics that he was going to teach in the West, that he later called transcendental meditation. But let's be clear, he wasn't teaching transcendental meditation in 1955. He was teaching his version of what his teacher had taught, i.e., he was teaching them to have a japa, to repeat the mantra, and that they were also seeing some form of their gods. It's an open secret that in those days he was teaching exclusively really Indians, and that's how they behave. They'd all been taught the same thing about gods, that you need one or several. He came to the idea that he wanted to spread meditation to the world. It was quite a big deal for him to come to that idea. He actually came to it about 2.5 years after he'd been teaching people. And he suddenly came out with it in January 78, I think, 58. Sorry. And he suddenly announced that he wanted to teach the world meditation. And of course, I've lost my notes now. Yeah, it was the 1st of January 1958, and he launched, and he actually said later on that he regretted using the word meditation. Meditation has so many meanings, and all those of us who've been taught meditation have had to explain to other people, no, it's not meditation like what you think. It isn't concentration, it isn't contemplation. It's different. I can't explain. You've got to learn. So we've all been there, and it's unfortunate that meditation has this ambiguity, but it's right as well, because it is, it was a religious term, and in many ways there is that essence of religion that hangs to it. In other words, we are going to a higher power, the higher power within ourselves. I think that one of the things that Gurudev brought home was that you're not worshipping a god or gods outside of you who live 3 light years away or in a different universe, that whatever it is that you're worshipping is within yourself. And I think that was a revolution. It's a revolution for me as an individual to kind of think that worship would be within, that I could be the object within of what I mean, that's so complete and so beneficial. And it solves the disconnect. If people are running around trying to satisfy themselves because they feel a sense of disconnect, and yet you can resolve that disconnect within 15, 20, 25 minutes, I mean, it's a fantastic thing. To me, I wouldn't say it saved me, but it saved me that anguish of always looking for something. Because after I found the inner peace, all I've done ever since is prat around. I've just enjoyed my life. I just went for a walk before the meeting. I didn't look at my notes for hours and hours and get a headache over it, because I'm not that invested. It's like my investment is in meditating and being at one with myself. Everything else can take its own place in the universe. That's an entirely different teaching to that we learned at school, and that we're being pummeled by the media. It's really, really different. What else have I got to say? How's the time getting on? 3 quarters now. Yeah. So how did Gurudev choose people's mantras, and how did he teach them the way to meditate? Well, he I'm going to find the word that he used the word Shakti Pravritti, which is the power or the tendency of a particular individual. Maharishi put it into slightly different words. He was asked, and this is what he was asked. This was in America, in the States, that is, in 1959. And the questioner said to him, Maharishi, how may a person find, which of the 5 materials are predominant in them? And he said, well, they have their method. And it's interesting that he said they have their method, because he's not saying I've got my method. He said they have their method. From the tendencies they know, from the cut of the face they know, from the tendency. So he's echoing what Gurudev had said about the power and the tendency, word for word, actually. And the person isn't happy with his answer. And he said, do you take that into consideration when you give the person the mantra? And he said, I don't go into these vibrations, botherations. I ask him, and this is quite blunt, which God you like? So this is Maharishi in 1959. And he says, Shiva. And Maharishi laughs. He said, okay, Shiva, that's it. And where is the time to go into complications and all that? Ask him directly what he likes. And that is it. More laughter. And somebody comes, oh my, I don't have any liking for anyone. In other words, they don't have an understanding of Sanatana Dhamma, of the teachings, the Devata, whatever. And he said, oh my, when you were young, which temple were you going to? What was your father worshipping? And then from that, he takes the inference as to how to teach this person. And the person's clearly not satisfied with this because it's like, yeah, right, but I don't go to a temple. My dad never went to a temple. I don't know what you're talking about. So he said, how would you apply this to Westerners? And Maharishi said, oh, here we don't go into these minute details. We get the mantra direct, and that does all good for him, not into so much details. Well, one of the things that has been said about Maharishi was that he was teaching in the West a form of Hinduism. And real Hindus are sort of saying, no, he wasn't. Wasn't doing that at all. And in fact, he wasn't, because by the time that Transcendental Meditation got its name, which was in the mid-60s, he wasn't teaching like this anymore. And he wasn't teaching his teachers to speak like that anymore or to behave like that. He wasn't giving them the palette of mantras that he was using himself. He gave them a palette of sounds that he felt was suitable for Westerners, being taught predominantly by Westerners. That's a huge distinction. Transcendental meditation isn't the same as Gurudev was teaching, and it isn't even the same as Maharishi was teaching initially. He learned as he went along. He was an innocent abroad. He was trying his best, and then he came across the crunch. I mean, let's face it, he was this Hindu brahmachari. He's suddenly in Hollywood, you know, with wealthy businessmen with loads of money, and he's like, he was very tempted to do what he did, and that was to stop teaching in terms of, oh, yeah, you can leave a little something in the hat or something, to we've got a product here. We've got a meditation technique which we could give to everybody in the world. We're not going to make much headway unless, one, I train teachers, and two, I charge people. I'm not defending him. I'm saying how it went, and that he was charging people so that he could build up an organization and, what was that? And pay for the administration, pay for the buildings, pay for the lecture halls, everything. And therefore he wasn't teaching the Hinduism that Gurudev clearly was. And he wasn't teaching in the same style as he was up to that time. And I've never heard somebody else make that distinction. And I think this is a good opportunity for me to make that distinction. Yeah, so there we are. Some of you wonder, he wanted to make it all scientific, didn't he? And let me quote him from 1960. So we're on the dawn of this change. And he said, we belong to the realistic age of science. Let us be sure that all we strive for and maintain and achieve remains realistic. Our age of scientific unfoldment does not give credence to anything shrouded in the garb of mysticism. Let us realize the absolute being through a scientific and systematic method of achievement, where every achievement will be supplemented by the personal experience. He's talking about absolute being. That is not a Hindu expression. He's talking about scientific and systematic method. That is being objective, not being subjective. And he's saying, let it all be about supplemented by personal experience. He has my 100% endorsement on those words. As a Westerner who was never indoctrinated in Hinduism, that's what I want to know, the actual clarity of it. I'm very, very interested in all the Hindu side. I've spent a lot of time in India, and I spend a lot of time going through it. But I like to realize that I'm allowed to stay objective, that I don't have to become a Western Hindu. And it's interesting that Gurudev wasn't trying to Hinduize Westerners ever. He wasn't saying, well, the world would be a better place if all you Westerners came to our temples. I see no evidence for that whatsoever. He wanted Indians to follow their own tradition. And he wanted Westerners to follow their traditions, whatever that means. And that's what Maharishi said. And it's interesting that they both maintain that, whatever you're doing, get on with it. It's like they were both born in India. They're both a product of a very proud tradition, and they just wanted to keep that going for themselves and their fellow countrymen. They were not trying to sell it to us. So any of these people who are critical of the TM movement and for trying to make them Hindu, they're absolutely so wrong. It's only the likes of Bob Schulte and myself who actually are that interested in India and in Indianization. We're the exception. Most people are pretty dry, and a lot of them still drink alcohol, and a lot of them still eat meat, and they're not bothered by Hinduism. And I've met people who meditated for years and years who are no more Hindu than they were. The kind of problem area is where they get little bits of Hinduism. So they start worrying about what they're going to be reincarnated as, or when something goes wrong, that they worry about which lifetime did that. And this is kind of novel for Westerners to think like that, because we were not brought up that way. Hey, look, a lot of people wonder what meditation used to be called before, transcendental meditation, what it was called by Gurudev. And they look to me to give them that. And they look to me to tell them what they want to hear. They don't actually want the answer. Gurudev called it sadhana. This is your program, how you go about benefiting yourself. And it's complex. It might involve you reading, it might involve you chanting, it might involve you making certain observances to your forefathers, to you bow to your parents, all the many things. This is sadhana. You can't pick out just because you meditate this one narrow path. And Maharishi, when he was confronted about what did it used to be called, and this is kind of a rare shard of information. He was on a show called Speaking Freely back in 1973. And Ed Newman asked him, what did your master call it? I'm paraphrasing. And did he have a particular name for what you call transcendental meditation? Now, I'm quoting what Maharishi says. I'm not quoting what I think, I'm quoting what Maharishi says. In Sanskrit, in Bhagavad Gita, we get this word bhavatit, beyond the thought, transcendental, just that. Bhavatit dhyaan, dhyaan is meditation, and bhavatit is transcendental. This is common. But what was rare was the practice, the technique, whereby one uses only the nature of the mind and uses the nature of the mind. The mental activity subsides and settles down to that inner calmness. So now you know what Maharishi's story of how it got that name. Yeah. Now, has anybody got any questions? Roland, what's going on in the question zone?
Thank you, Paul, for this very, very insightful talk and knowledge, and the broadness of all these various approaches to the term meditation, and even transcendental meditation, or how you may call it. And as we have learned it, and many of us just being familiar with the term transcendental meditation, but as you have been describing now, there are so many different pathways to give a word to what the phenomenon is. as approaching to the inner self, which for many people are those you call the gods, according to the tradition, and whereas we in the Westerners, we hardly anymore connect with God, but we connect with objective science and this. But still, this idea of the inner self, seems to be the common phenomenon I've understood. We try to bring across here, but even more, of course. I can't repeat your talk, Paul. It was great. I have no question at all, but maybe somebody in the audience have got a question. Please come up.
Well, I'm only stopping for breath. That's why I've stopped. I could talk for hours, but I'm stopping for breath. So if anybody's got anything to say.
Yeah, it could be, it could be.
Paul, a comment and a question. You've outlined that the original name that Maharishi referred to Gurudev was Bhagavati Dhyan, but later on, when he was teaching still in India, it was he called it this booklet Deep Meditation, and I wondered if at that time when he was teaching in India, he was teaching something like what he taught us, or it was still the Indian form. And also, I've heard that he started out with giving people an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, and he found that wasn't practical, and he, cut it down to our meager abilities. So I wondered if you'd care to comment on that, how it evolved to what we know now.
Yes, I think the basic pattern of the meditation stayed very similar, but he made adjustments, and the timing is a significant one. But I think even Gurudev adjusted the time from different people. Like he's telling the pundit, I have this debriefing, as it were, from a pundit who was taught the best times in the day to meditate. And he was given 5 different time periods, whereas in other ones he was advocating 2. So he's talking to different people, and he's going to be attuned to that as we're attuned. When we talk to different people, we don't say the same thing. If we're talking to our children, we don't say the same thing as we're talking to a shopkeeper. And it's not unnatural when, if there are discrepancies or differences between the different statements about Gurudev's teaching, it's hardly surprising. But he did increasingly teach people meditation. This is at the nub of all this. He was the one that brought out the significance of easy meditation and fruitful meditation. And that's what really changed, because up till then, a lot of people got very stressed about meditation. And in Zen meditation, if you fell asleep, somebody would come up and hit you with a wooden pole. I mean, it was really, you were supposed to suffer. And Christians broadly believed that suffering was good for you, that they extolled it. We've taken, for better or for worse, we've taken a completely different turn. All of us here are of the opinion that we want to be happier in our lives, more contented. That hasn't been the philosophy all the time. And in order to calibrate people's meditation, both Gurudev and Maharishi have had to adjust the times and the techniques to suit the individuals or the communities that they were talking to. When Maharishi went back to Nepal, he was teaching them in a totally different way. He was teaching dozens at the same time on headsets. I mean, like if you heard of a teacher doing that, you'd remonstrate with them and say you were never told to teach like that. But he would do whatever he thought was necessary. And he basically did his, as far as I'm concerned, up to and including when he met the Beatles, he was the meditation checker and teacher. He did not set himself up as a guru. And it was only latterly that his audience saw him as a guru. and that he made statements that might portray him like that. I'm only interested really in the meditation aspect, which is why, I mean, I'm so pleased that we're talking today, because it's almost a realization of my my thinking for half a century. It's unbelievable. It's so important to me, and I goofed it. You know, I haven't said half of what I wanted to say, and I haven't said it as well as I would. But that's called being a human, and I have to accept that. And I think that we, all of us, have to accept being a human, and we have to accept that our meditations are only smoothing us out. They're not turning us into Superman. When they're not turning us into gods, they're not teaching us, they're not turning us into the most powerful or the most wealthy human beings. We've got to get rid of any notion of perfection or attainment. Meditation is headed in the opposite direction. It's giving you peace of mind. It's letting your mind be at peace with itself, letting the body be at peace with itself. Whatever happens after that, we just discover it's an innocent process. And I think that both Maharishi and Gurudev have given us all a path to walk down, which we wouldn't be walking down otherwise. And which many people are not walking down. And those people who are not walking down it are very troublesome, and they're causing trouble for all the rest of us. But I think that my presentation of how Gurudev taught could be improved hugely, but then I can't give a presentation on him and one about Maharishi and one about the Yoga Sutras and about my own experiences. I've had to compact too much in an hour, but I'd really love to hear any more questions, and I think we might have some on the chat line. I don't know.
If it's possible, I do have a comment more than a question.
Who's that speaking?
Carmelo from Malta. Carmelo from Malta.
Okay. Can we see him? Yeah, there he is. Hi.
Okay. My video is always on, but there's a large audience today. Congratulations on your presentation. Thank you very much. This is the third edition and the second one that I managed to follow. Very, very, very insightful. I just wanted to say that the tradition that you presented of Gurudev and Maharishi, and the choice of the word meditation at the very beginning of the presentation, you were saying that it is a bit of an unfortunate choice because meditation means so many things. But in my personal experience, living 20 years in Singapore and studying philosophy since I was a teenager and now living in Malta, is that meditation today in the popular language means exactly what we are doing. In fact, it is associated with yoga, it is associated with transcendency, it is associated with well-being, it is associated with mindfulness. So when you read, for example, that Marcus Aurelius called his notes meditations, you have to take a step back. It's like, Marcus Aurelius, he knew about meditation. We are a bit surprised that there are meanings beyond what we are accustomed to. And this is a testimony to the fact that indeed what Gurudev and Maharishi had left us has now matured into the predominant collective understanding of this practice. And I think it's very good.
Absolutely. And you could see it happening because in the 70s, the church, at least in England, were very aware of the changing meaning of the word, and they tried to incorporate it into their own churches. So they were infected by the idea that meditation could be a kind of sweetener rather than something to add to the stress of life. I mean, it's not to criticize Christianity, but there has been a very heavy focus on suffering. And, it was hard to reconcile their way of looking at things with Maharishi's dictum. And yeah, following what you're saying, is really that has happened to a large extent. It hasn't got his name on it, it hasn't got Gurudev's name on it, but the common parlance, yeah, a lot of terms. But you know, somebody mentioned yoga. I think you mentioned yoga just now. We need to remember that yoga is still being talked about as if it was yoga. What I mean by that is that people still practice gymnastic yoga and think that they're practicing something very deep. And in fact, hatha yoga didn't come about till about 1,000 years after the first mentions that we have in our writings. And I mean, it's great. I used to practice yoga. I'm not damning it, but it's not that deep. It can tone you up. It can rest you up. It can be very beneficial. But I think people are still stuck in the idea that it can be an end all in itself, as it was in the 60s with Richard Hittelman, you know, get fit and do my yoga stuff. And it's still going on. I was having a chat with a nurse the other day who was visiting, and she didn't seem to have made the transition. She was really enjoying doing yoga and going away on a yoga retreat and having nice food on the yoga retreat. But I don't think she'd migrated through to the idea of actually meditating. And from all these quotes, that's what it is. It's not putting your leg up in the air or around your back or whatever. It's, you know, the tradition of Gurudev and Maharishi, they weren't into physical hatha yoga, really not. I mean, give him his due. Maharishi got some yoga asanas demonstrated at his very first talks, in his earliest talks in South India. So he was embracing it. But yeah, so I think we still got a lot of work to do of communicating to people what they need to do. And I need to go right back to my first observation, if I can find my notes, which of course I can't. Here we are. It's this fixity, and I really need to get it across. So I think that whatever you call it, whether you call it prayer or whether you call it meditation or whether you call it yoga or whether it's a fashion or whatever, it's about a disconnect. And human beings, more than animals, have this disconnect. They're all in the mind. You know, so many people say, oh, stop thinking about it. You're overthinking. You're too much in the mind. Let go of your thoughts. And it's a big issue for human beings, especially highly intelligent ones, to resolve the conflicts that they have in their head. And they're so elaborate that they can spend hours, days trying to resolve stuff. And yet yoga does it almost instantly. I mean, I'm such a person. I do a lot of trying to resolve things. I'm no better at meditation than I was the first time I sat down to meditate. But it's a good habit. So I sit down and I'm going, oh yeah, well, I'm thinking about this, that, and the other, and I've got to do this. And what was that I heard? And I'm doing all the nonsense. And then it suddenly goes silent. And it's like, oh, that's nice. I've let go of stuff. You know, it's like, oh, it's that. No, it's really nice. And then like you realize that you're not breathing and you go, oh, my. And so it works, you know, to whatever degree it does, you kind of get away from being so intensely involved in the outside world. And I think if people knew of the real practical value of doing that and the fact that you have access to this area where you've reconnected, that you get over that disconnect, and there'd be much more take up for it. And I really, really support the efforts of ITMA, who want to train people to be teachers, because I want there to be more accessible teachers. We don't have any teachers in my community here. I wouldn't know where to find a TM teacher, a meditation teacher. And in fact, go on.
Can I reinforce what you just said with an analogy in my personal experience? You said I am no better at meditating than I was 40 years ago. And of course, that is not true. And I will tell you why. Because I will give you this analogy with the sea. I'm also a sailor. I started working professionally at sea as a fisherman. And I noticed that at the beginning, seasickness just immobilitated you. It disabilitated you. You could not work because you were seasick. But it was so bad that it hampered everything you did. So when I take it to my practice of meditation, today I am much better than when I was a teenager at trying to meditate. Not because I've improved in my ability to stand still and be quiet, but because I still have the pervasive and invasive thoughts, just as I did 20, 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, but they don't bother me anymore. They don't bother me anymore. So it's amazing. And at sea is exactly the same. I was working with these people that were much more experienced working at sea, and I would see during bad weather, during storms, that their faces turned green and they were silent and their eyes were tiny, but still they went on working. And so I said, it's not that you don't feel seasick anymore. It's just it doesn't bother you anymore. So that is a huge breakthrough for when in the practice of meditation, you are no longer bothered by the distractions that go on in your head.
Yeah, mainly. I'm still very mortal. But a friend of mine was talking on that sort of count, and she said, "Oh, things don't stick to you." And I thought, well, of course they do. But it's a nice, perhaps they stick less. Yes. It's really nice that you bring up these subjects. I still think that I know better. I don't see life as linear, that we get better and better. I kind of see it in a slightly opposite way, is that if only we relax more and we're more ourselves, we just get more out of life, you know. But that we could talk for hours about this. It's just words, isn't it? So
thank
anybody
you, Carmelo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carmelo. And is there anybody else who would like to ask Paul a question?
Paul,
So just
if I may, I'd like to offer
raise your voice.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
So, okay. So yeah, I'd like to offer another perspective. I don't think that Maharishi is actually giving a different meditation practice than Gurudev had. What I've seen from other gurus, other teachers, is that they give their practices, their teachings in stages. They give preliminary sadhana practices, japa, asanas and pranayam, chanting shlokas, puja, and then bhakti practices. And then over time, when the student is ready, they give them more advanced practices. And from the scant writings we have of Gurudev's lectures and things people have written about what they learned from him, I'm thinking it's more like Gurudev was giving introductory lectures in his lectures. He was talking more about his preliminary Vaidhi Bhakti practices, where you focus on the form of God and doing japa on the name of your Ishta, your chosen deity. But it may be that like other teachers, Gurudev gave this same Bhavati Dhyan that Maharishi gives to advanced practitioners, but it's just written about. And Maharishi just simply cut out the middleman. He cut out the beginning stages. The Vaidhi Bhakti practice of just, it's japa on the name, and it's rup dhyan, meditation on the form of God, rather than bhavati dhyan, meditation on the state beyond thought. And then there's different types of japa as well. I mean, there's japa with beads, there's hard japa where you're you're beating the mind up if it wanders, and focusing hard to stay with the mantra. And then there's what I call soft japa, where it's okay if other thoughts come and go, but you're just coming back to the mantra easily. But with japa, there's no concept of leaving the mantra. It's all stay with the mantra, as opposed to bhavati dhyan, where we want to refine the mantra and we want to lose the mantra. And so I guess I'm just proposing that maybe Gurudev also taught this bhavati dhyan, but
I don't put it out at all. Yeah, it was an imprecise statement on my side. I wouldn't want to be quoted on it. Because yes, I agree with you. I mean, you can't do an audit of what Gurudev was teaching. I think what I was trying to say, Bob, there was that the prevailing teaching of giving Ishta Devata mantras to people, and a genuinely a backdrop of a belief system which is particularly Hindu, was different. Maharishi didn't fall back on that. So that's what I meant about them being different. I think that they're
my
all
point is that's more of a preliminary practice, not the final.
But it's about where you're going, isn't it? It's they're the same if they both get to the right destination. And I remember
they do, but I don't think it's different destinations either. It's
no, I wasn't.
I don't consider it right to be a higher understanding than devotion. It's they go hand in hand.
What I was going to say was that Maharishi said that any meditation that can transcend itself is transcendental meditation, and I'm echoing that, saying that any practice that Gurudev was teaching and any practice that Maharishi was teaching was aimed at exactly the same thing, which was the yoga. It's the verse 2 of the yoga, and it's of the Yoga Sutras, where the Yogashchiti Vritti Nirodha, which is the dropping away of all that mental activity, and you will attain the feeling of yoga. And after all the work that I put in on Gurudev, and looking at it from this direction and that direction, and seeing, oh, it could mean this, and it's like, no, it's all the same. He's shuffling people in from wherever they happen to be to the point where they do transcend, and that is what Gurudev and Maharishi had in common and have given to the world. And I can't think of anybody else who did that. I'm not saying they didn't. I'm not saying that if you look into the teachings of Ramana Maharshi or Shivananda or any of them, that they didn't do that. I'm quite certain that they did, but they didn't do it with any great amplitude, and nor did any of the disciples of Gurudev, other than Maharishi and Shantananda to his degree. Nobody else was doing that. Nobody else was proclaiming it. And that's what's caught our imagination. It's like, hey, what does this word transcend mean? Well, whether you like the word or not, it's triggered something. It's like we can go beyond our own. We can let go. And I was saying just then about how I haven't got any better at meditation, but I do love letting go. So I don't mind waiting. I don't mind sitting. And, when I know that I've let go, I've got no point in meditating anymore. I don't know about you guys, but I sit down to let go. I don't sit down there to wallow. I just sit down there to let go, to readjust. What a mechanic or an engineer would call a reset. A computer engineer would call a reboot. A gamester would call a restart. That's all I'm doing. I don't know what other people are doing. I know that some people spend a lot of time in their program, hours and hours and hours. I don't. Not interested. I go down, get a reset, get up, get on with it. I'm not a good person, and I'm not. I'm just using it for my own use to refresh. Yeah, it's another nice word. So but I think it is a spiritual technique because it enlivens your spirit, and I I've had a lot of experience online with meditators, for better or for worse. And I find that mainly meditators end up apologizing for goofing or for saying something out of order more than your general populace. Do you know, if they've goofed or they've done something bad, they tend to say, "Oh, hey, I'm sorry about that," or I misunderstood." Even if it takes them some long time, they do it. Whereas the general populace, you could wait a lifetime. So it is spiritual.
Paul,
My way of measuring it.
Paul,
Anybody else got anything to say?
Yeah.
this is David Spector from the USA. I'm a teacher of TM, like most of the people here, I guess. You've talked a number of times about the settling down of thoughts when we sit to meditate. I wanted to share with you something that Maharishi teaches that hasn't been mentioned so far, that I think is an important part of the teaching. And that is the teaching that the process of transcending isn't just the inward stroke in which we think the mantra and the mantra is forgotten and everything is quiet and we experience an unbounded awareness. There's also an outward stroke, which Maharishi calls stress release. And in this outward stroke, because of the deep rest that the body has gotten and the unique state of that rest, in the outward stroke of meditation, the nervous system spontaneously eliminates some of its stresses. It's important to say right away what we mean by stress. Stress means an overload of experience. So, for example, a child might almost be hit by a car, and there's a tremendous experience of fear, of fright, and that experience can't be handled by the child's nervous system. And so the nervous system protects itself by deadening part of itself so that it's less responsive to if that particular experience were to happen again. And indeed, if we have multiple traumas as a child, we become used to them and we're not as bothered by them as they repeat. But there's a part of the nervous system that's become dead, unresponsive. And this is called a stress. Maharishi calls it a stress. So we have these stresses, and only we tend to only acquire these stresses as we get older. We release some of them each night in sleep and dreaming, but not all of them. And so with TM and other forms of meditation, NSR and other forms, we finally get the deep rest that we need to spontaneously release those stresses. And when the stress releases, we have a thought. So thoughts during meditation are the side effects of stress release. And they mean that something good is happening, that the nervous system is actually getting rid of those stresses. But we're experiencing them one more time, or perhaps a few times, before they're finally gone. So this process continues in each meditation, and finally a particular stress is gone for good. Then other stresses have a chance to be released, like layers of an onion. And when the final stress is released, or even just not active, not released but not active, when no stress is active, then we're in the state of nirguna samadhi. Nirguna samadhi means no vibrations of the mind, no senses of perception, complete silence of the outer world, but complete awakeness inside, unbounded awakeness inside, blissful awakeness inside. This is self-absorption. And this is it, when it becomes permanent, because all the stresses have released. This is called the fifth state of consciousness, which Maharishi colorfully calls cosmic consciousness. And then he talks about higher states as well. But in our discussions, I notice that we rarely talk about the process of stress release. And I wanted just to summarize it here so that we had some idea that it does exist, and it's something that someday probably will be measurable objectively. For now, it's not measurable, but it helps us to understand what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, that idea of stress release you bring up is really very important. And I agree with Paul. I don't feel that I've become more proficient in meditating over the years. I'm doing the same thing I did 48 years ago. It's just that through the stress release, it's like that fog starts to dissipate in our consciousness. And I'm finding I have longer periods of silence. And even though I have lots of thoughts, like Paul was saying, they just don't bother me anymore. And that's all stress release. And so you're right, that's an important aspect, the release of stress and the fog of consciousness that dissipates. So just a little point I want to throw in.
Thank you, Bob. As we have seen that we have already 1.5 hours being together, anybody wanting to have another question which wants to place to Paul Mason?
I've got a question to ask myself. Well, it's a novelty anyway, isn't it? What should I talk about next time? I'm giving another talk in a month, and I've talked about Gurudev, and I've talked about the comparison of meditation techniques, and they're two real hot potatoes. They're the ones that come readily to mind. I would have never thought that I could give a talk about comparing the meditations, and I'm not saying that I've done it justice, but I think I need to kind of ramp down a little bit and kind of tackle an easier topic next time. So I'd appreciate if anybody's got any ideas what topic I could deal with next time, to either mail me or put them in the chat box here or something, because I have no idea. In fact, I didn't choose these two topics, so I'd much prefer to stick with the idea of other people choosing the topics, because I just can't think of them. All right. But anyway, if anybody else has got any questions, proper questions, I'm still here.
Oh, can I say one last thing about not being not getting better?
Go ahead, Carmelo.
So humility is very important. I realize that, and the more what was it, Socrates? The more you know, the more you realize how little you know. So that's fantastic, and I understand it. But the fact that you yourself say that now you use meditation in an almost selfish way, that you just go in, refresh, and go out, and that is a testimony of having dramatically improved. Because when I speak to young people that are trying to meditate, they tell me how difficult it is for them to get any benefit from it, that they have to really focus and sit down and concentrate and find and it takes a long time before they can quieten their mind and so on and so forth. And when I tell them, well, after a while, you just it becomes automatic. The moment that you close your eyes, you evoke your mantra, boom, you're there. You're in a deep state of meditation, and you are in the state of samadhi, and you are capable of experiencing that kind of rest that comes from meditation. And many of them are like, wow, that's amazing, you can do that. So I don't believe that we don't get better. We do get better. We still fight with the problems that we faced since day one, but we do get better.
Well, we get new stuff, and they appear to be big, and we've got to work through this new big issue. But yeah, it basically things are getting lighter. I see what you mean. I had a particular example of that. I don't, a lot of people seem to like meditating together with other people, or come and we'll meditate together. And somebody did that number on me. They came over to where I was living, and they said, "Oh, it'd be nice to meditate together." And it's like, is that a proposition or what? It's like, what are you saying? And I was really I was really uncomfortable at being with a stranger in the same room and falling into samadhi. It's like, it's something I do on my own. It's not something I do communally, and it's not something I do with a stranger in the room. And I didn't know how to fight it, so I let it happen. And then I'm sitting there thinking, here's this guy sitting in my room meditating. There's no way I'm going to meditate. And I'm sitting there like not meditating, not even closing my eyes. Then I think, oh, maybe I'll just close my eyes for a little while, just see this through. And you can probably see what happened. It's like, and then like, I don't know where I am. I don't know who I'm with. I don't know what room's what. And I'm just completely refreshed. And I realize that I've actually sat and meditated with this complete stranger in the room. And we've had this group meditation. So in a way, you're right, because although I'm not better at meditation, I think that I'm more habituated to the idea of sitting and settling, and that it gets on regardless of me. I think regardless of my hesitation and my concern, it happens anyway. And that was a real shock, because I'm like resisting it, and I'm kind of, oh, I don't want to do this. And yeah, I find it. And same happens on an airplane or a bus or something. I say, there's no way that I'm going to sit meditating on this crowded bus with all these people around, and the air hostess is going to come along. And it's like, oh, how long have I been in this kind of rather pleasant state of awareness? So, I think it's not as cosmic as, Maharishi used the word cosmic consciousness. And perhaps those of us who look at like films and comics, we expect that to be like lots of stars and swirlings and things like that. And so cosmic has to acquire a new reading of a more gentle one, less kind of spacious and far out. But I suppose he's right. I never asked him what he meant by cosmic. I made up my own mind.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Carmelo.
Thank you.
I would like to
Thank you.
I would like to take now, at this point of the time, the invitation of Paul that whoever wants to participate in finding a new topic for Paul Mason, you're very so much invited to do that. Just look up the website of teachersofmeditation.com, and then you can produce another idea, and maybe we can spread a whole thing, a new one. Paul Mason doesn't know yet himself, but he knows you are such a source of knowledge and space. So I'm very happy to have you here now. Even though you said you don't like so much to sit together to have a meditation, I may just invite you, Paul, now to participate in our meditation now.
I can see that
would propose, and so I would propose we have a group meditation now for 10 minutes, and then we just say Jai Gurudev afterwards. Yes, thank you very much for this wonderful talk. Somebody writes here in the notes, in this later years, Maharishi taught the citizen yogis flying. He also discussed performing yagyas. What did Gurudev teach about these aspects of human development? Well, this might be a topic for later on. Thank you, Maya, very much. And for now, I just want to say these were wonderful. Almost 2 hours sharing with you, and Paul, for your wonderful talk, and I'm very grateful to have had you here now, and I'm very much looking forward for the next talk in about 1 month, and so to say, Jai Gurudev.